I'm a 27-year-old female from a family where close really means they're going to micromanage every single thing I do until I snap. I'm the youngest, with just one older brother, Ethan, who's 32 and somehow thinks he's the family patriarch. He's always been that way, bossy, opinionated, and obsessed with how everyone else lives their lives. My dad is the quiet, go along to keep the peace type, and my mom is the crier. You know the type. Any disagreement turns into, "Why are you tearing this family apart?" I work in architecture, live 2 hours away in a small city, and I love my independence. I've built a life for myself, good job, nice apartment, no roommates, and I can finally breathe without someone checking my phone or commenting on my outfits. But apparently, that freedom makes me the problem child. Ethan's convinced I'm wasting my life by not settling down with someone he would approve of, living closer to home, and basically living under his thumb again. They've done this family intervention thing more than once. That's what they call it. It's not dramatic like in movies, but it's just as calculated. They invite me for dinner, wait until I'm seated, then take turns expressing concern translation, ganging up to make me feel guilty until I agree to whatever they want. Last time, it was Ethan insisting I move back to help with our parents before it's too late. The time before that, it was a full-blown lecture about how I wasn't taking relationships seriously because I wasn't engaged yet. The last visit was when things really shifted. I'd left my phone on the counter while helping my mom cook, and Ethan straight up read my texts out loud at the table. Nothing scandalous, just some flirty back and forth with a guy I'd gone on a couple of dates with. But that didn't stop him. He even added commentary like I was some reckless teenager. I grabbed my phone back and told him he wasn't my legal guardian. My mom started crying, my dad stared at his plate, and Ethan said I needed to grow up. After that, Ethan called me and said, the family wanted to have a structured talk about my lifestyle. The next time I came home, in his words, like I'm some project they need to fix. That's when I decided, fine. If they want drama, I'll give them a plot twist so wild they'll never forget it. 2 weeks later, I met Jack. It was a Friday night, and I was at this dive bar with some coworkers after work. Jack rolled in on a motorcycle, all tattoos and gravel voice, with that smug confidence that either makes someone your worst mistake or best story. He sat near us and eventually started chatting with me. I don't even know why I told him everything, but I did. He listened, and then I said, half joking, "You want to pretend to be my chaotic husband and crash a family intervention?" He laughed so hard he almost fell off his stool, then said, "I've always wanted to play a soap opera villain." That's how the plan started. We decided we'd fake an elopement, show up together, uninvited to the structured talk, and drop the news like a bomb. We made up a whole backstory. We met in Vegas, had a whirlwind weekend, and got matching tattoos. Jack even bought a fake ring off some sketchy online marketplace. We'd act disgustingly in love. My job was to look dreamy and say things like, "When you know, you just know." His job was to smirk, wear leather, and say something inappropriate at the worst possible time. I told him we'd leave right after dropping the news and turn our phones off for the weekend. I'd booked myself a spa retreat in the mountains, no signal, no distractions, just silence while they all stewed in confusion. Jack was all in. He even practiced lines like, "I knew she was the one when she kicked that drunk guy in Vegas," and "We were married by an Elvis impersonator felt right." I added glitter to my hair and found a white sundress that looked just bridal enough to raise eyebrows. D-Day came. We drove into town that morning. Jack was wearing a leather jacket, aviators, and had his helmet under his arm. I looked like I was floating on a cloud. We walked into my parents' house, hand in hand. My mom's face froze. My dad stood up, and Ethan, who had just started saying something about this conversation being important, got interrupted. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Sorry, we're late. We just got married." Jack raised my hand and kissed the back of it like a cheesy movie villain. Dead silence, not one word, no screaming, no questions, just open mouths and wide eyes. I let it sit for a second, then said, "We just wanted to share the news, but we won't stay. We have, honeymoon plans." Then we turned and walked out. Jack and I didn't stop laughing until we were halfway down the highway. He said we barely made it 10 steps into the living room before the silence turned into chaos. At first, it was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Then my mom dropped the casserole dish she was holding. It shattered across the tile in slow motion green beans and glass spreading under the dining table. Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His jaw moved like he was trying to form words but couldn't pick which disaster to respond to first. He looked from me to Jack, then to our joined hands, then back to me. His eye twitched, it actually twitched. I hadn't seen that happen since he lost a middle school spelling bee and claimed the judges rigged it. He finally spoke. His voice came out loud and sharp, like he'd skipped the warm-up rounds of anger and gone straight to the finals. He asked what we meant by married, like someone had just told him I'd robbed a bank in broad daylight. Jack didn't even flinch. He smiled, tilted his head slightly, and told the room we'd gotten married at a courthouse in Nevada. Very romantic, he added. Then he said, "We were thinking of moving to Costa Rica for a bit to reconnect with nature." My father kept blinking. He wasn't speaking, just staring between Jack and me like maybe this was a prank show and someone was about to yell, "Surprise! You're on camera!" Ethan snapped out of it before anyone else. He jumped out of his chair and launched into one of his classic speeches. He called me impulsive, said this was another example of how I'd never grown out of my rebellious streak. According to him, I'd always been this way, always chasing chaos, always making everything difficult for the family. Jack leaned over and whispered that he was getting real sitcom villain vibes, and I almost broke character. I decided to keep pushing. I told them we were thinking of having kids immediately, maybe twins, if we got lucky, and that we were starting a travel blog to document the journey. Jack nodded and added that we'd already picked names, then winked at Ethan like he was in on some private joke. To sell the story, we'd drawn fake tattoos on our ring fingers that morning using permanent marker. Mine had a little J in cursive, and his had my initial and a tiny heart. I made sure to flash my hand when I tucked my hair behind my ear. Ethan spotted it instantly and went pale. He asked if we were serious, if we'd really tattooed each other's initials after 2 weeks. Jack kissed the side of my forehead and told Ethan that he could relax now that he didn't need to take care of me anymore, because he would. Ethan looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. He put a hand to his chest and muttered something about not again before sinking into a chair like he couldn't feel his legs. My aunt started yelling for someone to call an ambulance. She was convinced he was having a heart attack, but Ethan waved her off and said he was fine, just caught off guard and maybe a little lightheaded. Jack offered to get him some water, but Ethan waved him off too, still staring at the floor. My uncle stood up, slammed a hand on the table, and shouted that this wasn't funny. He called it a joke in bad taste and accused me of humiliating the family on purpose. I turned to Jack and said we were running late for our flight. He checked an imaginary watch and said we had just enough time to grab our bags and head to the airport. We walked out the same way we came in hand, past my mom kneeling on the floor, trying to pick up casserole shards. I could still hear my uncle yelling as we closed the door behind us. We got back into Jack's truck and peeled out of the driveway like we were on a mission. Once we turned the corner, we both burst out laughing. Jack said he hadn't had that much fun in years. I didn't check my phone until we were nearly halfway to the resort I'd booked. The second I turned it on, it lit up like fireworks, 39 texts, 12 missed calls, and a dozen voicemails. Ethan's were first, telling me to come back now, saying I'd lost my mind, demanding I explain myself. Then came the ones from my mom. Hers were more emotional. She begged me to please talk and to let her see me before we left the country. One of my cousins sent a long text threatening to cut me off for disrespecting Ethan like that. Another said they'd always known I'd do something like this eventually. My dad didn't send anything, not a text, not a missed call, nothing. Jack looked over at me and asked if I wanted to stop somewhere for ice cream. I tossed my phone into the glove compartment and told him that sounded perfect. We pulled off the highway and found a roadside diner with a neon cow on the roof. We sat in a booth, ordered the biggest sundaes they had, and clinked our spoons together. Meanwhile, back home, my family was apparently considering staging a second intervention, this time to reverse the damage. They didn't know the chaos had only just started. Day 2 of the disappearance, as my family was apparently calling it, started with pancakes and fake blog post drafts. Jack made breakfast in his usual loud, clumsy way, flipping pancakes too high, blasting music in the background. We brainstormed titles for our fake travel blog. Jet lag and matching tattoos won by a landslide. He even set up a site with photos from random beach stock images and wrote fake captions about our honeymoon in Cabo. My phone had been off since we left, but when I turned it back on to check directions for lunch plans, the messages started flooding in again: missed calls, voicemails, guilt trip texts, and one cousin who texted Sophie, my best friend since college, asking if I was safe. Not worried safe, more like tell us where she is safe. Sophie didn't answer. She just forwarded the message to me with a note that said, "Your cousin is nosy." Around 2:00 that afternoon, Jack and I were lounging in my apartment, watching a terrible dating show, when Sophie called. She said my parents had shown up at her apartment building. They didn't make it past the buzzer, but she saw them standing in the parking lot arguing. Apparently, my mom was crying, and my dad kept checking the car like he expected me to appear from behind it. I live across town. I wasn't even in the same zip code. About an hour later, someone buzzed my apartment. It was the pastor from our family church. He was holding an envelope and looking uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure why he'd been sent. I didn't answer the door. He eventually left the envelope by the door and walked off. A few minutes later, I saw through the peephole that he'd slipped something under the door and walked away. I waited until he left the building, then picked up the envelope. The letter inside was handwritten by my mom, not typed, not printed, full on old school pen and paper. She'd written 5 pages. Most of it was about how much pain I was causing her, how Ethan's health was fragile, and how disappointed she was that I'd made such a big decision without including them. There was a line about how you used to be such a sweet girl and a whole paragraph about how Jack doesn't seem like the kind of man who puts family first. I passed the letter to Jack. He read it twice and asked if he should grow a mustache to complete the villain look. Not even 10 minutes after that, my aunt messaged me, saying Ethan might need surgery. She didn't specify what kind, just said the stress had brought back his old heart issues and that they were monitoring him closely. I didn't respond. I called Sophie's brother, who works as a nurse at the hospital Ethan would have gone to. He checked no emergency room visit, no hospital record, nothing. They weren't worried about me being hurt. They were upset they couldn't manage the situation. That's when it clicked. This whole storm wasn't about love or concern. It was about control. I'd slipped out of their grip, and now they were throwing everything they had to reel me back in. I decided to meet my parents, just them. No cousins, no siblings, no Jack. I picked a cafe in the middle of town, public, neutral ground. I gave them a time and made it clear the meeting would end if anyone else showed up. They agreed. They arrived right on time, but they didn't come alone. They brought a lawyer and a stack of annulment pamphlets, actual printed brochures, with titles like Legal Options, After Impulsive Marriages, and Starting Fresh. My mom slid them across the table like we were finalizing a loan. My dad sat beside her, arms crossed, watching me the way someone watches a ticking clock. I didn't even flinch. I thanked them for the reading material and told them Jack and I were already planning a second wedding celebration in Costa Rica. We were going to have a beachfront ceremony with live music and floral archways, and I'd make sure their names were on the invite list. My mom just sat there, blinking at the pamphlets like they were written in another language. I don't think she'd prepared for me to double down. I don't think she'd even processed the original announcement. She looked lost. My dad eventually cleared his throat and said something about how he loved me, even if I made mistakes. He looked tired, not sad, not angry, just like someone who was realizing none of this was going to end the way they'd hoped. I told them this wasn't about a real marriage or a fake one. It was about boundaries. I'd been ignored, overridden, and steamrolled long enough. I said if they wanted any relationship with me, they needed to stop letting Ethan speak for the entire family. No more group decisions about my life, no more interventions, and no more guilt tactics. Neither of them argued. They just stared. I stood up, paid for my own coffee, and walked out. Later that night, Ethan called from a different number, screaming. Jack and I had just gotten back from dinner when my phone lit up. I answered, turned on the voice recorder, and held the phone away from my ear while Ethan shouted that I'd ruined the family structure. His words. He accused me of turning everyone against him, of using outsiders to destroy family unity, and of humiliating him in front of our parents. I didn't say a single word, just let him vent until he hung up. I saved the recording, then blocked his number. Now it's quiet. But that kind of quiet never lasts for long in my family. 2 days after I blocked Ethan, 2 police officers showed up at Sophie's apartment. They asked for Jack by his full name. Sophie called me in a panic and we rushed over. The officers were calm but firm. They said a family member, Ethan, had filed a wellness check. His report claimed Jack might be mentally unstable and possibly manipulating me. He used phrases like emotional hostage and psychotic break. Jack opened the door wearing a hoodie, holding a mug of coffee, and looking completely unfazed. He offered them a seat and asked if they wanted anything to drink. I handed over my ID and calmly explained that nothing dangerous or illegal was going on. One of the officers seemed skeptical and asked to speak with me in private. He gently asked if I was safe, if anyone was pressuring me, and if I needed help. I told him our marriage was unconventional but fully consensual. He asked a few more routine questions, then nodded and said they just had to verify some details to close the report. Jack chimed in and said our marriage was more of a symbolic ceremony and that we planned to file paperwork soon. That was technically true. The ceremony never happened legally, but the officers didn't need that part. They left without incident, but said someone might follow up to verify documentation. We thanked them and watched them leave from behind the blinds. Less than 2 hours later, Sophie got called into her manager's office. Someone had been calling her workplace, asking questions about her background and her shift schedule. She didn't get the full name, but the front desk said it was a man with a family emergency who wouldn't leave a callback number. Sophie put it together instantly and warned me. I told her to give her manager a heads up that someone from my family might try to dig deeper, and she filed a complaint. Back at home, Jack pulled up his laptop and logged into a background check site. He'd worked in real estate a few states over and still had access through his brokerage. We ran his name, address history, and any public records clean, not even a parking ticket. Then he composed a formal-looking email with the report attached, addressed it to Ethan, and sent it with the subject line, "Since you're so concerned." Later that evening, Jack got a text from an unknown number, just the word liar. He blocked it immediately. Then my cousin Lily reached out. She'd always been the calm one, the peacekeeper. We grew up playing hide and seek in the backyard and sharing snacks under the table at family weddings. I thought she was neutral in all this. Her message was 4 paragraphs long. She called Jack dangerous, said my behavior was selfish, and told me I was still loved but clearly lost. She ended it by saying, I needed to repent and annul the disaster before it's too late. I didn't respond. I blocked her too. Jack and I figured it was time to shift focus. We booked a table at a rooftop restaurant downtown and invited only a few close friends, people who were already in on the joke. We dressed up, had dinner, clinked glasses, and handed a friend our phones to take some clean. Well-lit photos, no captions, no geotags, no context, just a picture of us toasting, my hand on his chest, a sunset in the background. We posted 3 photos each on our profiles. That was all it took. Within an hour, my aunt messaged Sophie, asking where the wedding reception was being held. My other cousin posted a vague Bible quote on her story. One of Ethan's friends, someone I hadn't blocked yet, left a comment under Jack's photo that just said, "Unreal." We didn't reply to any of it. We just watched. By the next morning, I had 8 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. My mom tried once more. I didn't answer. I didn't plan to not until they stopped treating my life like a crisis and started treating it like it was mine. I stopped at a grocery store to pick up a few things, and my debit card declined. I tried again, same result. I used a credit card instead and sat in my car, opening my banking app. My main checking account showed a temporary security, hold no transactions, no details, just locked. That account was one I'd opened back in college. My parents had been co-signers originally because it came with better student benefits. I never thought twice about it since the account had worked fine, and I rarely interacted with the bank unless it was for routine transactions. Turns out, because the account still had their names listed as co-signers from my student days, they were able to request a temporary hold by claiming they were concerned about financial fraud. The bank flagged it for account safety pending verification after Ethan told them I was unstable and possibly being manipulated. They called the bank and flagged it for her protection. I went straight to the branch. The next morning, no appointment, just walked in, gave them my ID, and asked to speak with a manager. I explained the situation and made it clear I was not in any crisis and had not authorized any freeze. The manager reviewed my ID, checked the account history, and saw the parental access. I shut the joint account down completely on the spot, transferred everything to my personal account, the one Jack and I had set up quietly a few weeks earlier. That account wasn't connected to any family members. No one but me had access. Luckily, I'd already transferred some money into it that week. Rent was due in 3 days, and I barely dodged a financial mess. Jack didn't even blink. He printed out a list of ways we could cut back on groceries and subscriptions, just in case, like he was already used to thinking 2 steps ahead. He joked that this felt like a survival challenge and started calling it budget month. After everything that had happened, I finally booked an appointment with a therapist. I didn't want to wait anymore. We talked for almost an hour. I told her the whole story, from the fake marriage to the bank freeze. She listened without judgment. At the end, she looked at me and said, "You didn't just fake a marriage, you staged a rescue." That stuck with me. 2 days later, I noticed a couple of old friends from high school had unfollowed me on social media. I didn't think much of it until I saw a post Lily had shared. It wasn't about me by name, but it was obvious who she meant. She wrote a long message about how some people fall so far into self-destruction, they pull others down with them, and that true family will always try to intervene, but even if it looks harsh. Her followers commented things like praying for healing, and you did the right thing. At work, things got weird too. My manager called me into his office and asked if I had a minute. He didn't sound upset, just confused. He told me someone had sent an anonymous email to the department head, claiming I was mentally compromised and potentially a liability to clients. He didn't share the message, but it had enough personal detail to raise eyebrows. I pulled up my performance reports, showed him my last project completion times, client reviews, and feedback scores, then offered to take any evaluation he wanted. He shook his head and said it wouldn't be necessary. "Whoever sent that is clearly trying to sabotage you," he said. "You're not the one under review here." That night, Jack helped me look into reputation management services. I found one that specialized in personal attacks and digital cleanups. We scheduled a call. They helped me start a digital trail to protect myself, search filters, monitoring alerts, and steps to report coordinated defamation. As one final move, I posted a redacted clip from Ethan's last voicemail online. I cut out names, removed location hints, and shared it anonymously on a subreddit focused on toxic family dynamics. The recording was only 30 seconds, but you could hear him screaming, accusing me of destroying the family, of saying I'd let a stranger corrupt my mind, and that I was no longer one of them. The feedback was instant. People called the voicemail unhinged, disturbing, and controlling. The top comment said, "He sounds more like a dictator than a brother," and still, no apology, just silence from the ones who started all of this. 3 days before the fake engagement party, I got a message from Ryan, my ex-fiancé. We hadn't spoken in over a year. His message was short, casual, and completely out of nowhere. He wrote, "So I guess I'll see you at the party." I stared at my phone for a good 30 seconds before calling him. He picked up quickly, sounded a little unsure, and said he'd gotten an invite from my mother. According to him, Ethan had reached out and told him I was going through something and could really use someone from my past to bring me back to reality. Ryan wasn't the type to get involved in drama. When we broke up, it had been mutual, clean, respectful, and final. But Ethan had apparently shown him old photos of us, told him I'd never really moved on, and convinced him I was having a manic spiral triggered by an unstable relationship. Ryan said he hadn't believed all of it, but admitted he thought maybe I just needed a familiar face. I told him clearly and without yelling that this party was a private event, and he was absolutely not invited. To his credit, Ryan apologized and said he wouldn't come. But the fact that Ethan had taken things that far, digging through old memories, rewriting our relationship, and feeding it to someone from my past, it was a whole new level of messed up. We went ahead with the party. It wasn't a huge event, just about 30 people, mostly friends and coworkers who had watched this whole thing unfold in real time. The venue was a rooftop lounge decorated with white string lights and gold table runners. A friend brought cupcakes instead of a cake. Jack wore a dark green button-up shirt and joked about learning to dance just in case someone made a toast that required it. Everything was going smoothly, people were mingling, laughing, taking photos under the arch. One of Jack's friends had built out of spare wood and fake ivy. Then, halfway through one of the toasts, the elevator dinged. The doors opened and out walked Ethan, my mother, and Ryan. The room went quiet. You could hear the clink of a fork being set down. Jack was the first to react. He walked straight to the mic and said, "Well, we've got surprise guests. Let's welcome them to our little rebellion." People laughed nervously. Jack raised his glass like nothing was wrong and told everyone to keep dancing. Ethan wasn't having it. He started shouting over the music, demanding I stop the performance and come to my senses. He talked about annulments again, told everyone I was sick in the head, and said Jack was manipulating me for attention. It didn't matter that half the room already knew it was all staged. He still wanted to blow it up in front of everyone. My mother didn't say anything. She just stood near the back, clutching her purse like she'd walked into a courtroom by mistake. Ryan looked like he regretted every step that brought him there. He didn't say a word the entire time, just stood there, eyes wide, shifting his weight from foot to foot. One of our mutual friends had brought a +1 to the party, a woman named Clara, who turned out to be a local freelance journalist. She hadn't known anything when she arrived, but after watching the scene unfold and doing a quick search of my name, afterward, she messaged me the next day. She said she wasn't trying to be pushy, but asked if I'd ever consider sharing what really happened. She called it the most quietly intense social story I've ever stumbled into. I declined the interview. I wasn't ready to go that public, but it was the first time I realized that the story wasn't just mine anymore. People were paying attention, and not in the way Ethan had wanted. They weren't shocked by my choices. They were shocked by how far my family was willing to go to erase them. Later that night, after the last guest left and we were cleaning up, Jack sat on the couch and scrolled through photos. He stopped at one where I was laughing, cupcake in one hand, confetti stuck to my hair. Then he asked, "What happens when the pretend stuff feels more real than the family that raised you?" I didn't answer. I just saved the photo. A week after the engagement party, I called it the performance, the storyline, the noise. It had run its course. Even though we were still in control, it didn't feel like control anymore. Jack knew before I said anything. He sat me down one morning, slid over a cup of coffee, and told me I didn't owe him anything, not a dramatic exit, not a clean conclusion, just a choice. Then he added, "You don't owe me an ending, but I think you need one." That afternoon, while I was out getting groceries, he packed up his stuff. No long goodbye, just a sticky note on the fridge that said, "You don't need a partner to win a war, but you've got one if you ever want one." No signature, just his usual smiley face and the drawing of a tiny motorcycle. I deleted all my social media, changed my number, and turned off everything for a while. I left town with no destination, just a week's worth of clothes and a rental car. I stayed in a cabin, walked trails, and cooked food that didn't come in takeout containers. I didn't check messages. I didn't call anyone. When I came back, I sent a text to my parents. It was one sentence. There was no marriage, but the betrayal was real. No one replied for a few days. 3 weeks later, I got a call from my Aunt Marie. I hadn't blocked her, mostly because she'd stayed out of the worst of it. She told me Ethan had flown to another state with his girlfriend and gotten married, no notice. No photos, just a quick elopement. According to her, he told the family he wasn't letting anyone ruin his story too. Apparently, he wanted to prove something. He told people, "At least my marriage is real." His girlfriend didn't know any of the backstory. They'd only been dating for 6 months. She thought it was spontaneous. She didn't know it was part of a rivalry. 48 hours after they returned home, she found out everything. Someone sent her the link to the wellness check report, the fake banking interference, even the audio clip from the subreddit. She read all of it. She asked him to explain. He called it family drama. She walked out the next morning. The fallout didn't stop there. That subreddit post had gone around enough to land in unexpected places. A listener mentioned it on a mid-sized podcast about family manipulation. Someone connected the dots, and Ethan's name got attached to it online. His employer found out a week later. They placed him on indefinite leave, no details, just a quiet internal shakeup. I asked to be re-added to the family group chat. Sent one final message: I didn't ruin Ethan. I held up a mirror and then left the chat again. A year later, I live in a different city, new job, smaller apartment, but it's mine. I have limited contact with my parents, mostly surface level, like birthday texts or neutral holiday updates. I haven't spoken to Ethan since the voicemail. He hasn't tried. I'm dating someone now, someone kind, steady, the sort of person who doesn't raise their voice to win. No fake backstory, no games, no strategy, just quiet dinners, shared playlists, and slow weekends. Every now and then, I think about Jack. I still have the note he left, stuck between pages in a book I never finished reading. And when I do think about him, I smile because not every fairy tale starts with love. Some start with fireworks, a fake ring, and just enough chaos to burn down the castle behind you.